the sector are wrestling with. Obviously, significant hikes in energy prices last year impacted on tenants directly, but also on landlords' business plans too. Today, we'll be exploring that latter impact, looking at how housing providers are looking at their commercial energy usage with renewed vigour as a result. We'll be looking at lessons emerging from last year and how they could and should be influencing procurement decisions moving forward. We'll be asking the factors that organisations need to be considering when choosing an energy contract and the extent to which these have changed. We'll also be looking about how businesses should be scrutinising their own energy consumption to mitigate against future price increases, and the role that data can play in informing some of those big decisions, including reducing energy consumption. So a range of different issues feeding into that one overall topic about the way energy prices could impact on the type of procurement deals signed by housing providers. To talk us all through this and more, we've got a fantastic panel lined up today. We'll be hearing from Dion Tickner, lead analyst with Cornwall Insights, Dan Pardesi, head of social housing with Enenco, and Greg Felder, heat network manager with Southern Housing. So welcome all. And I think before we go live, we've got a poll just to see where people in the room are today. So just to give a bit of a feel for where you all are. So we'll just that poll is, how long was your present energy contract for? So we'll just ask you that question now. And we'll give you a few seconds just to get a bit of a feel to help guide the conversation in the room today. So we'll just give you a few more seconds to answer that question. How long is your energy pole contract for? And there's a few options: 1 to 2 years, 3 to 5 years, 6 to 10 years, and I don't know, the old favourite. So we'll just give you another second or two, and then we will gather the poll results. So let's gather those results, and we'll just give it a second or two to do that, and then let's have a look and see where. So hopefully we should have some results. Here we go. Yeah, good. Now on my screen. So they are 1 to 2 years, the vast majority there, or just over 50%, 54.2% saying 1 to 2 years, 3 to 5 years, kind of next on the list, and then we've got 27.1%. So there's a significant number of don't knows in the room today. So a bit of a mix there, but certainly the kind of clear front runner being that 1 to 2 years. So we'll be hearing a bit about what that means and what that means for everybody in the room very shortly. One other thing to mention before we launch into the presentations, and that is this is obviously your opportunity tuning in today to ask the questions of our expert panel, and also to get the answers that are going to be useful to you in your jobs, to think about what you're doing in your own organisations. So do make sure that you use that question and answer box, and we will get through as many questions as possible following those presentations. So yes, that's us this morning. Welcome all, and that is more than enough from me. So I will hand over to our first speaker now, and that is Dion. So Dion, welcome, and it's over to you.
Thank you, Martin. Good morning, everyone. My name's Dion. As mentioned, I'm an analyst at Cornwall Insight. For those who don't know, Cornwall Insight is a group of energy experts who look at all areas of the energy industry and provide products and services to those who operate inside and outside of the energy industry. I personally focus on taking our expertise and giving it to organisations who aren't so energy focused. And so hopefully today I can give you a big picture of what's happening in energy markets in a way that's simple and understandable. But obviously feel free to ask me questions at the end. So we're going to begin by looking at the gas markets. And the headline finding here is essentially that if you go from the start of 2023 until the first week of May or so, the average cost of buying energy for the day ahead price was about 45% lower than it was for the same period in 2022. And Of course, this doesn't mean that your energy contracts are going to be 45% lower, but it's a strong indication of how markets have changed in the past year or so. And what you can see in the top right-hand graph by the blue dotted line is the fact that when energy suppliers were buying your energy for this year, for this summer, for this winter, last year, or maybe even earlier than that, they were buying it at higher costs than people who are buying energy now for tomorrow's consumption were paying for it. So there are quite a few factors behind what's caused prices to go down, but the primary one is around levels of gas storage. We've had a fairly mild winter in Europe, and obviously the EU has some pretty robust storage targets for all its members. So the levels of gas storage that we have in Europe now are currently in a healthy shape, meaning that there's not going to be a last minute rush and an upwards pressure on prices in the market, which is good because it means that prices will come down now for the meantime. And then the other significant factor is that one of the world's biggest consumers of liquefied natural gas, China, is consuming significantly less than it has in the recent past on account of the COVID lockdowns it's in currently. But what that also means is that there's an element of risk and volatility in the market again over the coming months or maybe longer term as they begin to open up their industries again and consume more natural gas. That will have a knock-on impact here in the UK and in Europe. So I'll go on to the next slide, please, which is just to look at power. Thank you. That's great. So similar trend, prices on average this year are significantly lower than they were last year. And of course, many of the factors behind it are similar to that of gas, because gas typically sets the price for electricity, having the highest marginal cost for electricity production. So that's been a significant reason for prices coming down. As I mentioned, the storage is remaining in a healthy way. But then, of course, there's also some concern over volatility in electricity, as electricity storage in Europe is not as, let's say, reliable as gas storage. And so the uncertainty over the conflict in Ukraine could basically mean that we could need to export a lot to our European partners, or we could need to export less than usual to our European partners. It just makes it difficult to predict what will happen to prices in the next year or so, especially towards the end of this year and in winter. And therefore, there could still be some volatility. But if we can move on to the next slide, please, and I'll bring it back to the kind of longer term picture. What we're seeing is basically that prices have come down from that significant spike that we saw last year. And that's materializing in non-domestic energy contracts. But in terms of a longer term view, we're kind of entering a new period of the normal rate being roughly around where it is now, perhaps a bit lower. You can see on the graph on the right-hand side, the green dotted line is the pre-2021, pre-energy crisis, 5-year average for wholesale costs. And what we're basically predicting in our modeling is that prices will go down a little bit further from where they are now, which we'll talk about in a moment, but they will still remain around double what they were before. So prices now are quite high because of the need to ensure security of supply. So using expensive coal generation or gas generation, and that's why prices aren't dropping so quickly. And as we move into the middle of the decade and coal generation stations start to shut down, more renewables are rolled out as part of government's offshore wind targets, for instance, you'll have more abundant and cheap renewable energy, and we'll start to see the prices drop to a slightly lower level from where they are now. And then, of course, as you head towards 2030, you start to run into some challenges of decarbonisation, such as the increased energy demand from electrifying vehicles on our roads, or replacing boilers with heat pumps and so forth. And so the price will start to level out. So that's roughly how prices are looking in terms of where they are now. I'm happy to take some questions at the end, but I think I'll pass you back to Martin for now.
Fabulous. Thank you very much. And yeah, really interesting oversight of what the current state of play is, and really what should be feeding into some of those discussions that providers are having in terms of the procurement decisions they are making. So thank you very much, Dion. And just a reminder that as you're listening to this and taking on board some of those kind of suggestions about where that kind of longer term picture, do please ask the questions that are going to be useful to you and are the ones that spring to your mind when you're future planning yourself, and we'll get through as many of those as possible following the presentation. So thank you, Dion, and Dan, welcome. Great to see you, and over to you.
Thanks very much, Martin. So just to briefly introduce myself, I'm Dan Pardesi, Head of Social Housing at Enenco. I generally help social housing organisations to develop energy strategy and to think about making sort of long-term plans to secure prices and to best manage energy going forward. But my background is that I'm a chartered energy manager with the Energy Institute and have been working in energy consultancy for about 8 years, but prior to that as an in-house energy manager, both in the public sector and in other sectors too. And so that's a little bit about me. In terms of what I was going to cover today, I'll give a brief introduction to Enenco, who we are and what we do. And I'm going to go into some of the factors as best as I can in sort of 10 or 15 minutes that you should consider when thinking about a new energy contract. And I'll also talk about where to start with reducing consumption. So as an intro to Enenco briefly, we're the oldest energy consultancy in the UK, and we've been around since 1968. So we have over 54 years of experience. And we've seen our clients through many different crises through that time, whether that be the financial crash of 2008, miners' strikes or market deregulation. We've seen lots of different challenges, not just the last challenge we've had over the last year or so. In terms of our scale, we support about 550 corporate clients to help manage energy across a number of different sectors, whether that's the commercial real estate market, retail, manufacturers, or indeed public sector organisations. So we work quite extensively with education organisations, colleges, universities. We work a lot in the NHS, and we also support an awful lot of social landlords, including about 4 of the G15. And we help manage about £5.4 billion worth of electricity and gas spend each year, but we also help manage water and increasingly focus on decarbonisation and sustainability too. And we have around 300 people who work directly for us to help our clients manage their energy usage. So in terms of some of the factors to consider when choosing an energy contract, there are really a number of different options that you can choose to buy energy that vary in their complexity and their value. At the very base option, you can do nothing. You can go forward with no contract. Not very difficult to do, but also not great value. You pay out of contract rates, and that's really expensive. You can accept supplier renewals directly and allow yourself to roll in contract, which again, not too complex, not great value, or you can try and negotiate slightly with the incumbent supplier. Again, you may achieve a slightly better value, but not perhaps the ideal way of doing things. What most organisations in this space, certainly smaller scale organisations, tend to do is tend to go to market and to look at a fixed price contract, either via a broker or directly themselves. And some of the challenges with that are essentially that you go to market and you get a spread of offers, perhaps aiming to get 2 to 3 offers from different suppliers for a fixed price contract for a fixed period. The challenge recently has been actually getting offers from suppliers, because suppliers are far more careful since COVID about who they contract with and the shape of consumption that they want to take onto their books. So it's not always easy to get to 2 or 3 offers. Sometimes it's difficult to get one offer, and we've really seen that over the course of the last year. Equally, by going and fixing prices on that one day for that period, let's say you fix for 2 to 3 years, you roll the dice as to whether or not you pick the best day in the market to do that. About 70% of the overall energy costs that you pay are made up of the commodity price. And that commodity price is the part that Dion was just talking about there in his presentation. That changes every day. Markets move day in, day out. And choosing when to buy from the market is the most important factor in terms of achieving best price. So taking a fixed price for a set period does have an element of risk that you're choosing the best time. In terms of other solutions, you can also take a flexibly traded approach to procurement, where you agree a contract with the supplier and then use a risk management strategy to buy energy from the commodities markets in accordance with your governance structures and your particular organization's attitude to risk. And that can either be done on a fully bespoke basis, if you're in effect large enough in terms of consumption across your business energy meters to access that, or you can join portfolios or baskets which are operated by consultants to help get you access to trading flexibly on the markets. Now, the thing that we need to consider, whatever route that we take to buying energy, is compliance. For most social landlords, we need to purchase in accordance with Public Contract Regs 2015. So we need to make sure that wherever the value threshold is breached, that energy is bought compliantly. And next slide, please. One of the other factors that we need to consider is how long we're going to contract for. And this is an interesting debate currently, particularly with what Dion's been saying there about sort of where prices have historically been and what the new world prices are going to look like. Really, Dion saying there that prices aren't going to go back down to those low levels that we saw historically, according to forecasts. But what we see in some of our analysis is that the markets do tend to go in cycles, and the cycles that we've seen historically have been sort of 4 to 6 years. And the best way to achieve a good price or a low price is to buy at low points in the market. So buying at the beginning of the market cycle or at the end of the market cycle for a period before you start your strategy. We also therefore need to consider, with that contract duration, we need to consider dispensation. So for most social landlords, it's difficult to, who have leaseholders, it's difficult to contract for longer than 1 year without looking at Section 20 dispensation. And that can be something that your energy consultant and your risk and compliance team can support you to go through the process of. But overall, we're seeing many organisations now take longer approaches to energy procurement because of the fact that prices are cheaper the further in advance that you buy. Once that contract is in place and you have that vehicle to purchase energy from the commodity market, we need to develop the trading strategy. And the trading strategy, will vary for every organisation depending on your particular organisation's need for budget certainty at the one end of the scale, and sort of attitude to risk and the desire to achieve the best possible price at the other end of the scale. Now, the way that we support organisations is to develop a strategy that is specific for your organisation, and that it absolutely works with everybody's objectives within the business and the organisation. So it's really important to get all the key stakeholders bought into this process, whether that's teams from finance or indeed service charge teams often as well, to make sure that when energy is traded, it gives every team what they need, for instance, to be able to set service charges at the right time. And it needs to be aligned with your corporate risk and governance structures. Most associations that we work with have a very, unsurprisingly, are quite risk averse and like to make sure that trading is done in advance of the period where the rates apply, and that protective strategies are taken using things like caps and trading triggers to protect prices from upward market movement. It's also worth saying here that going forward, with ESG being such an important part of funding in the sector, that integrating a green energy strategy, perhaps sleeving green energy from renewable generation into your supply contract, can be something that can impact your trading strategy, but also have an impact on price. And that's a really important part of it. There's a balance to be struck in between best possible price and green energy and green credentials. Next slide, please. So just a few other issues to consider, and this is a difficult one to do quickly, but we absolutely need to consider non-commodities, so taxes, levies, transportation, and distribution costs. You can take a choice to fix them, or you can take a choice to have them pass straight through from those third-party organisations, the distribution networks and the transmission networks. Also, we need to make sure that the suppliers that you're working with absolutely know things like your VAT status, so that you're claiming only paying for the right amount of VAT and other taxes and levies. Credit has been an issue in the sector. So with prices getting so high over the course of the last couple of years, those suppliers do need to offer credit, and we need to think about the legal entities that you wish to enter into a contract with energy suppliers for, to make sure that they have an appropriate history and good credit ratings to avoid any issues in getting a contract or any credit premiums that may apply. We also need to think about things like payment terms and risk of debt. Debt is something that with very complex portfolios in the sector can often occur, and that can then make it a challenge to secure new contracts and indeed to transfer between suppliers. It's also an issue when reporting debt position to people like the regulator for social housing. So we want to think about payment terms, perhaps looking at things like direct debit to make sure that invoices are paid in full and any issues are resolved as a secondary to making payment. Also, we need to think about metering. So rolling out of smart meters is a really important issue for lots of housing associations, and indeed it's really important industry-wide. There is actually a deadline coming up now in 2025 for suppliers to roll out smart meters, but suppliers are already being fined for, in effect, not completing that smart meter rollout quick enough. What you can do through the procurement process is mandate that AMR is rolled out either quickly via a supplier team or indeed project managed by consultants similar to an ENCO to make sure that you get that automatic meter reading cover out there quicker, that data flowing back to suppliers, and to really eliminate the financial risk that you have of estimated readings on bills, and to make sure that far more actuals are included. In terms of other things, it's also important to think about the supporting services in the strategy. So whilst you've set up the trading strategy, you have your contract with the supplier, there are other services that can support different parts of the organisation. Things like the setting of service charge budgets in advance, so that you always know the fully delivered rate or a forecast of the fully delivered rate, whether that be the commodity element, the taxes, the levies, the transportation and the distribution costs, so that you really understand what costs are going to be, either for the next service charge year or indeed further in advance. And also to manage the invoices and to check that they're correct. We find errors on about 1 in every 5 business energy bills. So there is a lot of opportunity to drive savings by checking those invoices against all of the normal things like, are the contract rates correct? Are the taxes and levies correct? Do meter readings follow on from one another, and so on. We can also support in things like setting accruals. So with many associations having many hundreds of meters, if there's one meter that isn't billed, then it's sometimes useful to have an appropriate system in place to be able to build in the right accrual into the right financial period. And also, of course, reporting around consumption and cost is really important in this space, so that ultimately you've got the right tools to focus on reducing consumption. So those are a few issues, and as a sort of a neat segue into reducing consumption. And I always like the old adage, the cheapest kilowatt hour is the one that you don't use. Ultimately, if you don't have to buy it, then that is definitely the cheapest. And I think that consumption reduction for me really starts out with the data. Ultimately, understanding your patterns of usage gives you the best opportunity to spend your efforts, your time and resources on the best return projects. And broadly, I'd like to think about projects across 3 sort of categories: people, process, and technology. And from a people perspective, it's really important that both staff and colleagues and more broadly across the organisation, your customers, your suppliers, that they understand how and why to engage with energy, but also whether that links to carbon from an ESG perspective, using the data to drive appropriate behaviours to manage energy effectively. From a process perspective, I think that as a for instance, a control strategy is really important. So again, using that data to drive control strategy improvements, whether that be with things like heating strategy, which I'm sure Greg's going to come on to shortly, or indeed other controls for other technologies or users, such as lighting in shared spaces or lifts in shared spaces. And from a technology perspective, once you understand that data, you can go out there and start to look at auditing those high energy users, looking at particularly energy intensive plants, looking at energy intensive buildings, and understanding what's going on there, and either looking to build business cases for plant replacement, for upgrading to more energy efficient kit, or indeed looking at feasibility studies for the integration of renewable energy. And once all those projects are done, I think that ultimately ongoing monitoring is really, really important. So the old plan, do, check, act, ISO sort of framework is always really useful. Ultimately, you have to come back and measure what's happened, and to use things like the International Performance Measurement and Verification Protocol to check that projects actually delivered as per the business case. Now, with all of this starting with data, I thought it'd be useful just to run through a few examples of the types of analysis that can be done. So the first one is to look at profile of consumption. And this is just an example of one of the types of reports that we produce, looking at how energy is used from smart meters every half an hour, and looking at what's being used at night. Does that demonstrate any opportunity to improve controls? How are particular properties performing against target using this profile data? And this kind of analysis can sometimes then help with things like shutdown procedures. If you understand that there's a lot of energy being used overnight, why is that? Is plant being left on? Do you need to adjust policies or do more engagement with people to inform the things that they can actually do to help reduce overnight usage? Another example is looking at things like weather corrected data. So again, if you're looking at sort of gas usage for heating plants, looking at performance of gas usage correlated against weather. Is it the case that gas usage increases as it gets colder, and gas usage decreases as it gets warmer. Equally, this can be the same with air conditioning. Is it the case that air conditioning usage goes up when it's high? There are high temperatures, and goes down when temperatures go back to normal, or are there spikes and periods where they don't quite align? And again, that non-alignment suggests that there could be opportunity for things like controls improvements, which generally are the lower cost projects to implement. But also, in terms of where we focus our attention, benchmarking is really important, and looking at the performance of one building or one asset against the average for that type of asset, or the average for a property of a similar EPC level, or a property in that region. Benchmarking consumption of one site or one user against another often just helps you pick out where the low performing assets are and what can be done to focus attention on going there to find some energy efficiencies. And with that, I hope that's been useful. I'm looking forward to answer some questions, and I'll pass back to Greg.
Thank you very much, and really a great presentation and lots to pick up on there. And I should say we've got questions flooding in as well. Just a reminder, if you are tuning in, this is obviously to help you make the decisions that you're kind of wrestling with back at your own organisations. So do keep the questions coming in, and we'll get through as many as possible following the final presentation. So thanks very much, Dan. Very much appreciated. And as teed up, Greg, welcome. It is over to you.
Thanks, Martin. Thanks for the chance to be here today and present you all. I work for Southern Housing. We're a G15 landlord, and I've come along today just to give a bit of a high-level overview of some of the most important things I think you should consider in regards to your energy saving strategy, and just share some of our experiences. If we could go on to the first slide, please. Sorry, one more, thank you. I think the most important consideration, or perhaps the starting step of any energy saving strategy, should be getting the most out of your data, understanding data availability and also reliability. Perhaps most important will be the build or validated data that comes from your supplier or your broker. But depending on the nature of your organization, then there could be a lot of very diverse streams of data as well. These could include half-hourly data and AMR data from your data collector, sub-metering data from any bespoke systems you might have installed. On heat networks, this could include BMS data, bulk meter level data, or individual dwelling meters. And in houses, increasingly, this could include data from smart devices that are installed partly to collect energy data, but also to inform on other conditions in the property. And it presents quite a challenge for energy professionals, because often all of this data has its own platform, its own password, its own login, and it's really important to make the most of all of that data, and really get a handle on what all your inputs are. Data reliability, I think, is a key consideration as well, particularly build data. If there's anyone out there at all who has received a regular monthly bill from their energy supplier over the past 12 months, please do hit me up after this meeting, because I'd love to know who they are. Aside from reliability, I think it will also really help you identify where you need to collect your own primary data. There's likely to be gaps that you'll need to address. These could be in stock data. They could be understanding all of the details around your MPANs or where your meters are, or even identifying where you think it would be good to add sub-metering to distribution boards or to certain parts of your housing stock. Next slide, please. Thanks. So I think the second key consideration is really around investing in your portfolio data. The more layers you can add, ultimately, the more insights and possibilities you can gain in your energy saving strategy. And I mean this in a really specific housing sense. So I'll go into a few details here. I think the first thing I would say to absolutely anyone out there, the first thing you should do is link your energy portfolio to your housing management systems. The unique identifier on your energy portfolio is generally your MPAN or your MPRN. And then whatever housing system you use, if you can get that data to talk to each other, you'll massively increase the possibilities for energy saving. You're also likely to get some immediate benefits to your organization, improving the efficiency of processing and service charging energy for your finance team. I'd always say keep your finance team happy as a first port of call, and the rest will often flow from there. Aside from linking your your energy portfolio and your portfolio together, you can then add further layers on that will really help with analysis, and they'll really help you deliver specific and deliverable projects. So adding archetypes, building archetypes, thinking about boroughs and regions. I won't go into EPC, SAP and retrofit today, but obviously that's a key consideration. And also thinking about asset age and condition, and helping energy really complement the other challenges in your organization around planned asset management. Sorry, just on the last slide, a lot of this data is also very useful for reporting purposes. I'd really urge everyone out there to consider even voluntary compliance with SECR or ESOS, regardless of whether you're in scope. It's a great way to get your organization thinking about good data practices and getting prepared for energy saving, if you haven't done already. Next slide, please. And the last thing I think it's really important to consider is integrating energy saving into your asset management strategy or wherever it sits in your organization. Once you've really got a handle on your data and linked it to your portfolio, again, you can make it very specific to your organization. Whether you manage lots of commercial properties, lots of general needs housing, lots of supported housing. Good energy saving projects, I think, are specific. They're often delivered by lots and lots of members of your organization. They require buy-in from lots and lots of different teams, and you really improve the chances of, I think, a successful energy saving strategy if you get the data right at the start and link it to your organization. In my opinion, I think it's this stage that's really worth involving consultants and specialists to use your data to identify projects or then move to delivering them. And I've just given some examples here about what we've done at Southern Housing. So to start with, we've recently completed a storage and electric heating review. So rather than being data-led, rather than identifying high energy use cases and focusing on them, we wanted to review all of the areas in the organization where we had storage and electric heating, and we did manage to find some great savings. Partly we identified cases of high energy use and amended our planned asset management strategy to phase those out in the longer term. We also did some half-hourly analysis on some specific sites with storage heaters where they were all coming on around midnight, and we were getting these excess capacity charges from our supplier. So by identifying those and implementing some behaviour change, we were able to reduce those and lower everybody's service charge. Another recent project involves quite a major multi-year programme of surveying and identifying LED lighting opportunities across our communal portfolio. This can include things like stairway and hallway and staircase lighting, street lighting, and general lighting throughout our schemes. The findings of this are really used to generate quite a comprehensive business case and feed into both our planned asset management strategy, and where the business case was good enough, think about more immediate improvements to lighting, also from a compliance perspective, as well. And lastly, a project that I'm really proud of is optimizing thermostats in supported living schemes. So we have 3 heat networks, mostly populated by older residents, and we identified quite high energy use at these schemes via benchmarking. And we really had a look into why that was. And what we found was that residents had been given some really awful advice from heating contractors. A lot of them were being told to set their thermostats at 30 degrees and then adjust the heating control via their TRVs. And we thought we'd go for a ground up approach and really try to improve everybody's individual controls and see what net effect that had on the system. There was a lot of social value in there. I think we really helped improve living conditions for a lot of people. We've also seen quite significant reductions in energy use and improvements in efficiency across those 3 heat networks as well. I think that probably summarizes everything I've got to say at the moment, but really look forward to any questions. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Greg. Yeah, great presentation again, and yeah, lots to pick up on, and great to kind of round off with that kind of impact on residents as well, because I think that's something hopefully we'll pick up on very shortly. So yeah, lots to get through. Lots of questions coming in as we've been speaking. So do keep them coming in, and I'll try and get through as many of them as possible. We've got about 18 or 19 minutes left, so we'll get through hopefully a decent cross section of them. And Dion, you've been sitting peacefully for a while, so I might bring you in first. I think there's a couple of questions I'll throw at you. One which is a kind of big Europe-wide question, and then I guess there's a question which I'll probably run around the panel with, because I think it seems to be the common, which is a kind of when question. When do we go? When do we act? So Dion, I'll start with you. A question from Wayne. So this is the big picture question, and Wayne is asking, Dion, how long would the stored gas in Europe last if all other supplies were cut off? So that's the big question. And then to kind of throw out your take on the type of question we've been getting around the whens. A question from Amanda, for example, when is the best time to enter into a contract? Are there more decreases in prices expected? So that kind of when question is certainly quite a common theme. So Dion, I'll start you off on that. If that's okay.
Sure, brilliant. That's a great question about EU gas storage levels, and I think I'll also answer it from even a UK perspective, because that's even more telling about our relationship with European gas storage. So in the UK, I think our maximum capacity at the moment would only last around 5 days or so. It's really, really small. Compared to the EU, where if they filled up their gas storage by 100%, I think it would last around 3 months or so. I last looked a few months ago, so it may be a little bit different, but I don't expect it's drastically changed. And right now we don't have 100% of storage in the EU. The overarching target, I think, is 90% or so by October. Around this time of year, it's usually 30 to 40% full, but in fact, we're closer to 60%. And that's why, going back to what I was saying earlier, there's been a pretty positive impact on prices, which we're now obviously able to see in the UK. And then the next question was when question. It's a really good one. I obviously wish I had a crystal ball. I mean, we do have forecasting, which is data driven. And what we've seen is, the cliff go up in terms of prices. Middle of last year, it went up to around, 70 pence per kilowatt hour or something around there. And then suddenly first quarter of this year, it's plummeted to around half of that level. There's already a significant drop, which is why there are the return of multi-year fixes in the market more generally around for people to consider. It's very interesting that people are thinking, should I go now, fix now, and for how long, or should I do it in a couple of months' time? I think I can't say, which month of the year would be best, but I think what I can say is that based on our long-term view, prices will continue to come down, not immediately or suddenly. And in the short term, if you're unprotected in terms of your contract now and you have quite a high risk appetite, you might be penalised for not fixing sooner. But equally, there could be opportunities to fix at a lower rate in the near future. So prices to come down in the next year or so, but not sure which time would be the best to fix if you're looking at that now. Sorry, that's a bit of a cop-out answer, but it's the honest data-driven one too.
I think the honest data-driven answer is the one we're after. So no, thanks very much, Dion. That's really useful, and I think answered the kind of big picture question and the how you go about making that decision. Perhaps Dan, I will bring you in next because again, similar theme. So I think this is a question we want probably to everybody to wrestle with and to get a kind of rounded take on it. So yeah, that question from Amanda, and I'll throw in another one which is similar. When is the best time to enter into a contract? Are there more decreases in prices expected? And perhaps a slightly more specific one from Sean. We have a group of contracts that finish in November this year. When would you recommend entering into a new contract to ensure the lowest rates possible? And then a follow-up question, and for how long? Because I guess when we look at the poll from earlier, that kind of we're aware that a lot of people might be there or thereabouts in the room today anyway, in that position that Sean was just stating. So yeah, Dan, over to you.
I think this is always a really interesting question, and I think Dion's answer there that was sort of followed by, but ultimately we don't know what's going to happen, is the crux of it. Nobody knows exactly what's going to happen, and things can change and do change quite quickly. But I think from my perspective, if we take it back a year, or just over a year, we were in a situation where prices were going up and people kept on thinking, well, let's wait. And often that chasing the best price can be something that is a quite high risk, high stakes game. So it's not necessarily about chasing the best price all the time. It might be chasing the right price for your organization. And if at the moment the market's come down sufficiently to give your organization a good budget saving that everybody's happy with and that offers good value to tenants and residents, then that's something definitely to consider. But also we've got to think about how we access the market. So is fixing at this point the right tool for the job or not? There are other solutions, such as putting in place a flexible contract with a trading trigger which tracks the market on your behalf. That way there's no delay in accessing the market, there's no time to go out to tender, there's no issue in that regard. The contract exists and the commodity price that you end up paying is dictated by the trading tool that you choose. In that, for instance, a trading trigger. And I think that really gives the best of both worlds. It protects you if the market goes up, but it also allows you to follow the market down, as Dion suggests, as prices go, as we go into the summer with the current market outlook that we've got. So I think that that would certainly be my perspective on sort of both of those two questions. The point around for how long, I think again is an interesting one, but in both Cornwall's sort of analysis and in analysis from our trading desk, we're all saying similar things, that the market has come down considerably and we're not going to see a return to the £50 a megawatt hour commodity prices that we've previously enjoyed. Now we have to accept that the market is in a fundamentally different position. The whole of Western Europe has mandated that we're going to be less reliant on Russian gas going forward, and that's really an important thing. So we shouldn't hold off, and B, we can't expect that longer term prices are going to come down either. So taking prices that are available in the market and using those trading trigger tools to secure, even out as far as the market is currently liquid for or trading, does offer organisations budget protection at good prices when pricing in future years is cheaper than in current years. Apologies again, that was a relatively long answer.
It was a relatively long series of questions, and I think again, because there's certainly a thematic similarity between quite a few questions that have come through. I think like so important to kind of delve into that in some detail, I think. And Greg, I'm going to bring you in on that series of questions, the best time to answer and how long, and a question from Nikhil, which is similar. I think picks up on a point that Dan mentioned in his presentation. Actually, it was mentioned that energy should be bought at the low point of a cycle. Can you explain how you are to judge that point? So, Greg, I'll hurl that one at you, and then if anybody else wants to come back in on that would be great. But I think just wrestling with that issue of the best times.
Of course. Well, I think the first thing I'd say is, from a housing perspective, is the value for money element, and from where we are, then the value that we're getting from our suppliers has really decreased massively over the past 12 months. We've really struggled to get hold of data. We've seen customer service wait times massively improve. We've seen lots and lots of complications which are feeding in throughout the business. Delays to setting our service charging budgets, and real challenges. And buying decisions often coincide with thinking about the way the service is delivered and not just the price. The price element is volatile. It is a market, and I would urge you to seek the advice of your consultants on that. I think the simple answer is no one really knows. It's I wouldn't say it's betting or gambling or anything, but it's because you rely on proper analysis to get the right deal. But on the value for money side, then don't neglect thinking about your services. Getting accurate bills in every month, making sure the contracts support the rest of your organization's activities. And my take on this is that longer term deals at the moment, they're almost by default looking like the best option because they're a route to get the best customer service. We're seeing suppliers really quite difficult to deal with. As soon as we mention that we're a housing provider, they don't want our business. We're not getting very much interest when it comes to tendering. And I think it's fair to say it's a seller's market at the moment rather than a buyer's market. So as well as hoping that prices maybe return to normal, I hope the service returns to normal. And, I would urge you to think about how the structure and nature of your deal will affect your business in terms of its operations.
Really interesting. And I think just to pause for a second on that, Dan, I might bring you back in. There was a point there that referenced something you said for starters, but that kind of not easy to get offers point that you were making. I guess how do you work to kind of maximize your chances? Is there a variation between what different organizations are able to achieve? Dan, I'll just bring you in briefly on that.
In honesty, this isn't just a housing sector problem. It's been a problem through the energy crisis. Ultimately, when you put yourself in suppliers' shoes, they also have seen commodity cost increase, tenfold. And therefore, the amount of credit that they are issuing every time that they renew a single contract has increased. Now, aggregate that across every single customer that supplier has, and now they have a fantastically larger credit exposure and risk. And so, what Greg says there about, it being difficult to get suppliers to quote and it being a seller's market is reflective of what's happened over the last year. Suppliers haven't been eager to grow their businesses. In actual fact, many suppliers have found it difficult to renew their existing customer base that they have because of the credit issue. So it is important to think about who you're going to. And what I'd say here is to seek the advice of your consultant. You also have to think about, of course, compliance and how those suppliers can be accessed, whether that's through full OG tenders or PCR compliant tenders, or through indeed frameworks, and looking at the financial strength of those suppliers that are accessible through those frameworks too. And I think that kind of links into a point that I was going to make as well on the back of what Greg said about service levels. Suppliers have different sort of support structures in place for their customers. Most suppliers have sort of specific customer desks or customer account management desks for the larger energy consultants. And I think that is where we certainly get the feedback about a difference in customer service. Just through being one of the largest energy consultants in the UK, we're able to build in those service delivery KPIs into the contracts that we procure, and sort of really negotiate the service capability and sort of scale of service capability that that suppliers use to support our customers. So it's again really important, even when you come to consider which consultant you're going to use.
Thanks very much. And Dion, you look like you were perhaps looking to come in there, so I'll move to you next. And also, I just wonder, from that poll we had earlier, that obviously gave us an insight into the people who are here today, and that kind of those kind of 1 to 2 years. So I'm guessing a proportion of them would be fairly active now, and may explain their attendance today. I just wonder what message you might have for them right now if they're wrestling with some of those issues. So, but Dion, I think you were looking to come in. So yeah.
Sure. I mean, I was just completely agreeing with what Dan's had to say. I think he's really explained well what some of the considerations beyond price are, and often we found at Cornwall, when we're speaking to organisations, they just want price first of all, but there's so much more to it. And I think especially in the non-domestic area, where there are a broader range of suppliers to choose from, many of whom do operate in the domestic space, which is a bit more regulated, but in the non-domestic area, there are completely different rules at play, and making sure that even the consultants you work with, the TPIs you may speak to, and the suppliers you eventually go with, making sure they have that reputation and that financial backing too, if possible, not always possible, to determine that it is just a sensible extra step to make sure that you're taking the right measures for your organisation. Sorry, can you remind me of the second question? Was it, what message would you give to people?
I guess just from that poll earlier, it gave us a bit of an indication about where certainly a significant chunk of listeners today are. So yeah, I just wondered that those kind of 1 to 2 year people, what you might be advising them right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you can nowadays, I think, fairly easily keep an eye on the way prices are going and whatnot in terms of wholesale trends, and through consultants you can get more bespoke work that will tell you what your future costs may look like, so that will help you in preparation for renewing your contracts and whatnot. I think now is probably one of the best times to be investing in decarbonisation measures where you can. Energy efficiency especially is fantastic for your budget as well as the environment too, so it's a good way to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. So if you're not immediately addressing the question of what to do with your energy contracts, I would be looking at what you can do to reduce the amount of energy that you're using.
Thanks, Neil. And we've got a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to bounce through very quickly a couple of quite specific questions. Hopefully, a question from Andrew was to Dan, but I'll bring Greg in first on it, I think, and then Dan, just relatively quick answers because we've also got a minute or 2 left. A question from Andrew is, in your experience, where in housing association organisations is responsibility for utilities energy management strategy? Is it asset management, procurement, service charge teams, other? So I guess the first question is where, but also does it matter? I think that might be getting at, is there a best place for that to sit? So Greg, over to you.
Certainly. Well, obviously it's an area which touches lots of different parts of the organisation. I think probably your key teams will be your procurement team, your sustainability team, and your finance team. Each organisation is different, and it's hard to say exactly. But the operations side of things is mostly getting your bills paid. So your finance team will really need a big input, but often they aren't the ones leading the actual process of buying the energy. I think most commonly in the sector, it's usually sat somewhere between the sustainability team and the procurement team.
Brilliant. Yeah, thanks, Rick. And Dan, same question and relatively brief answer, if that's okay.
I think, like you said, there's a lot of key stakeholders in there that have different interests. So it's definitely important to have people involved from finance, and they may well be involved in things like strategy setting. Definitely worth having people from procurement to make sure that the whole thing is procured compliantly, and finance and sort of accounts payable too. But I think ultimately different organizations choose where energy is controlled sort of in different ways, and there's not necessarily one correct way to sort of do this. Different organizations do it well in different ways.
Thanks very much for a brilliant answer and brilliant discussion today. I should say, actually, there's one question I didn't get around, which is quite specific. Richard, but it's about TCRs. I think it mentions a supplier specifically, so I'll probably be a bit shy about mentioning that live. If you wouldn't mind, drop me an email, martin.hilditch@insidehousing.co.uk, and I will pass it on to the panelists, and we'll hopefully get you a specific answer on that too. So thank you very much. We are sadly out of time. Really interesting discussion today. Lots of really interesting questions coming through as well. So a few people to thank. Thank you for tuning in. And I hope we answered as many of your questions as we could, and giving some food for thought in your own organisations. Thank you to our fantastic panellists for a really great discussion. And I should say also a massive thank you to Anenco for sponsoring and making the event possible. So thank you all, and see you all very soon. Thank you.
Thank you.